She stood there in the middle of my lawn, arms crossed, sunglasses reflecting the birthday balloons swaying behind her, and she had the audacity to scream at my daughter, my disabled daughter, in front of everyone. "This is private property. You're not allowed here. Take your party circus somewhere else." Her voice cut through the music and laughter like a knife. My daughter froze in her wheelchair, a pink party hat slipping sideways on her head, a slice of untouched birthday cake resting in her lap. She looked confused at first, and then heartbroken. That look, the one where joy turns to shame, hit me harder than any bullet I ever dodged in my line of duty. Parents started whispering, some kids stopped playing, and Karen just kept going, waving a rolled-up HOA rule book like it was scripture. She pointed toward the sidewalk and barked, "Off the lawn, now!" That's when I calmly set down the soda I was holding, took off my sunglasses, and walked up to her without a word. She smirked, ready for a fight. But what she didn't know, what no one at that party knew, was that I wasn't just some dad in jeans trying to celebrate his daughter's birthday. I was the county sheriff, the man in charge of enforcing the law in the very district she thought she ruled with her clipboard and complaints. And today, I wasn't here to make arrests or write reports. I was here to protect the one person who mattered most, my little girl, and Karen. She was about to learn what happens when you ruin a child's birthday, especially when that child belongs to the man who upholds the law. But first, let me take you back to where it all began. When we first moved into Willow Creek Gardens, it felt like a dream finally realized. A quiet, well-kept neighborhood with tree-lined sidewalks, clean air, and neighbors who smiled just enough to feel friendly but not nosy. After years of high-pressure duty and late-night emergency calls, I was ready to slow down. Not for me, but for my daughter, Emma. She was 9, full of curiosity and sweetness, and bound to her wheelchair since birth due to spina bifida. But if you ever met her, you'd forget about the chair within 5 minutes. She had that kind of light, contagious, fearless, always finding the good in everything. I chose this place so she could have the peace and security I'd spent years trying to bring to others. In this neighborhood, I wasn't the county sheriff. I was just Dad, and that was exactly how I wanted it. In the weeks leading up to her birthday, she talked about it nonstop. The decorations, the butterfly-themed cake, the picnic-style party with her friends from school. She didn't want it in a restaurant or some stuffy indoor space. "I want it in the yard under the tree," she said, "with balloons that touch the sky." So I made it happen. I took the day off, put up a big rainbow banner, tied streamers to the oak tree out front, and even got her favorite ice cream truck to park just down the road as a surprise. Neighbors waved and smiled as we set up. A few offered chairs. Others asked what time the fun started. It felt warm. Right. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about arrests or warrants or background checks. I was thinking about pink plates and goodie bags. I was a father planning a birthday party for the girl who gave me purpose beyond the badge. But sometimes, even in the most peaceful places, trouble doesn't knock. It explodes. And mine came, wrapped in khakis, carrying a clipboard, and hiding behind the 3 letters that ruin more neighborhoods than any crime ever could. HOA Karen first introduced herself about a week after we moved in. She appeared at our front door unannounced, wearing pastel slacks, oversized sunglasses, and holding a clipboard like it was a weapon of righteousness. "Hi there," she said with a tone soaked in condescension. "I'm Karen Winslow, head of the HOA. Just making my rounds, making sure everything stays up to standard." She glanced around the porch like she was inspecting a crime scene. I shook her hand politely, told her we were excited to be part of the community, and that if there were any rules I wasn't aware of, I'd be happy to catch up. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We appreciate cooperation," she said. eyeing the modest wheelchair ramp I'd installed for Emma like it was graffiti. At the time, I shrugged it off. Maybe she was just overly enthusiastic about her duties. But I quickly learned that Karen didn't run the HOA. She was the HOA. And to her, that meant treating the entire neighborhood like her personal kingdom. Things escalated when Emma's birthday rolled around. The day before the party, I was in the yard hanging a string of butterfly banners and assembling a balloon arch when Karen appeared again, this time with a yellow measuring tape and her ever-present clipboard. "I hope this isn't going to be too disruptive," she said sharply, without so much as a greeting. "We have regulations about gatherings and noise levels, you know, and anything involving non-residents needs prior approval from the board." I paused, trying to keep it civil. "It's just a birthday party for my daughter," I said. "Small. A few of her school friends. Everything wraps up by sunset." She pursed her lips and looked over at the decorations like they were a public nuisance. "I'll be monitoring," she muttered, then walked off. The next morning, about an hour into the party, she returned, not as a guest, not with a smile, but with that clipboard and a scowl. The music, just a Bluetooth speaker playing cheerful pop songs, was suddenly excessive. The children playing hopscotch on the sidewalk were blocking shared pathways. The temporary canopy I'd set up for shade? Unapproved structure. And then she looked at Emma, sitting near the balloon stand, her party hat slightly crooked, watching her friends line up for cupcakes, and said, "She can't be sitting there. That's common-use lawn space. The board didn't approve it." I blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" Karen raised her voice slightly, drawing the attention of other parents. "That area is for community access. Wheelchairs damage the grass. If she wants to sit somewhere, it needs to be in your private driveway, not here." The world seemed to pause. Emma's smile faltered. She looked up at me with confusion and embarrassment, unsure what she had done wrong on her special day. Other parents exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to step in or stay out of it. I felt a slow burn rising in my chest. Karen had crossed from annoying into cruel, targeting a child, my child, in front of her peers, on the one day meant to make her feel like she belonged. I wanted to explode, but I didn't. Not yet. I simply nodded and stepped between Karen and Emma, shielding my daughter from the weight of those words. "Thank you for your concerns," I said calmly. "We'll handle it." Karen sniffed and walked off, flipping a page on her clipboard as if she'd just handed out a parking ticket. The party carried on, quieter, more cautious, but the damage had been done. Emma didn't laugh the same after that. She asked if she'd ruined the party. She wondered if the lawn really wasn't meant for her. And as I looked out at the decorations I'd hung with so much care, now dulled by that one bitter interaction, I knew something had shifted. Karen didn't just want rules followed. She wanted control, absolute, unquestioned control. And she didn't care who she hurt in the process. That's when I realized this wasn't just an unpleasant neighbor. This was someone who used authority like a weapon and didn't hesitate to aim it at a child in a wheelchair on her birthday. And that, right there, was the moment I stopped being just a father and remembered that I was also the law. The party was in full swing when Karen returned, this time not with a polite warning or an annoyed expression, but with a plastic folder stuffed full of printed HOA documents clutched under her arm like a legal weapon. Her lips were pressed into a hard line, sunglasses slightly crooked from walking too fast, and she marched across the lawn with the purpose of someone about to deliver a death sentence, not a neighborhood reminder. Parents were chatting near the refreshment table, kids were playing tag by the oak tree, and Emma was just about to blow out the candles on her butterfly-themed cake. I remember the moment clearly, my daughter's smile stretched ear to ear, cheeks glowing, surrounded by laughter and sunshine. She turned toward me, eyes shining, and asked, "Daddy, are you ready?" I raised the phone to take a photo, and just as she leaned forward to make a wish, Karen's voice pierced the air like a blade. "Turn that music off. This gathering is not board-approved." The speaker crackled for a second, then fell silent, as one of the confused guests reached to lower the volume. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The joyous chaos turned into uneasy stillness. Karen stepped between the kids and the cake table, holding up a set of stapled papers like they were a police warrant. According to HOA Ordinance Section 7.3, any community lawn used by non-residents, especially for events involving sound amplification and structures, must be formally approved 72 hours in advance. Her voice was loud, almost performative, like she wanted the whole block to hear. I stayed seated, jaw tightening, letting her speak. Emma blinked, looking at me, confused, her birthday crown tilting slightly as if even it was unsure what was happening. Karen didn't stop there. She gestured directly at my daughter's wheelchair. "And furthermore, heavy mobility devices are prohibited from common grass areas due to long-term turf damage. This area is not ADA zoned and you were never given an exception." I heard gasps. A few of the guests, mostly parents, murmured quietly. Others simply stared in stunned disbelief. Emma looked around and saw everyone's eyes on her. Slowly, she lowered her hand from the cake, her smile fading into something I hadn't seen on her face in months: shame. My daughter, who had been beaming with joy just seconds ago, was now blinking back tears in front of her classmates. "Daddy, should I move?" she whispered, barely audible, her hand gripping the side of her chair. My heart broke right there, and still I didn't move. Not yet. I just nodded gently and said, "Let's just wait, sweetheart." But Karen kept going, now reading directly from the page, waving it in the air. "We sent you multiple reminders about unregistered events. You were clearly informed about lawn usage regulations and you ignored them. Now I'll have to formally report this violation. Everyone not listed as a resident will need to vacate this space immediately." Then she pointed. She pointed at my daughter, especially her. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't awkward. It was cold, heavy, stiff. The kind that only happens when everyone knows they're witnessing something cruel, something wrong, but they're unsure whether to speak or remain frozen. I looked around at the other parents. Some shifted uncomfortably. One mom grabbed her daughter's hand and pulled her close. A dad at the back took a slow step forward, hesitated, and stopped. And then Emma did the worst thing a child can do at their own birthday party. She cried. Not a loud tantrum, not a scream, just quiet tears, slipping down her cheeks while she tried to hide behind her tiny hands. "I didn't know I wasn't allowed. I just wanted the balloons," she whispered. That was the moment something inside me snapped, not with rage, but with resolve. I stood up slowly. No sudden movements, no threats, just a deep, steady breath and a look in my eyes I hadn't used in years. I locked onto Karen's face, and for the first time since she started her crusade against my family, she looked uneasy. "That's enough," I said, my voice low and even. She turned toward me, lips curling. "Excuse me, sir, but I'm enforcing community policy." "You're harassing a child on her birthday," I said, cutting her off without raising my tone. "You've disrupted a private celebration. You've made a disabled little girl cry in public. And unless you want to add trespassing and targeted intimidation to that impressive list of HOA infractions, I'd suggest you walk away." Karen blinked. You don't have the authority." And that's when I reached into my back pocket. Slowly, calmly. I pulled out my badge, the same badge I'd worn for nearly 2 decades. "County Sheriff," I said. "I think I have more than enough authority." The color drained from her face. It was like watching a tower collapse in slow motion. Her expression, once smug and superior, fell into a mixture of panic, confusion, and disbelief. You never said, you can't use that here. This is private," she stammered. "Actually, I said, taking a slow step forward. The law doesn't stop at HOA lines. And right now, you're bordering on civil rights violations under the ADA. You've already verbally targeted a disabled minor. You've unlawfully disrupted a permitted gathering on private property adjacent to a community lawn. And you're interfering with the well-being of a child under my legal protection. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. But every word landed like a gavel hitting the bench. A few of the guests started clapping quietly. Others took out their phones, filming. Karen looked around, realizing the tide had turned. There was no clipboard, no printed HOA policy, no cheap power trip that could save her now. "Leave. Now," I said. She backed away without another word, face red, hands trembling, and disappeared down the sidewalk. I turned to Emma, dropped to one knee, and wiped her tears. "It's your party, baby, and we're not going anywhere." She smiled, just barely, and whispered, "You're the sheriff?" I winked. "Always have been." And with that, I stood back up and said, "All right, folks, who's ready for cake?" The cheer that erupted wasn't just for the dessert. It was for justice, for decency, for the reminder that sometimes the quiet ones carry the biggest shield, and when they stand up, it's for something worth protecting. Most people in Willow Creek Gardens knew me as just another neighbor. The quiet dad who always waved, mowed his lawn on Sundays, and walked his daughter to the end of the block to catch the special needs school bus every morning. I liked it that way. After 2 decades in law enforcement, anonymity felt like peace. I never flashed my badge outside duty. I never told people what I did. I didn't feel the need to throw around authority. I believed in restraint, in service, in solving problems with conversation before confrontation. I wasn't some hard-nosed cop out to prove a point. I was raised on the idea that real power came from how calmly you could carry it. As the county sheriff, I'd handled everything from domestic disputes to cartel-level drug busts. I'd been called into high schools to break up gang altercations and into hospitals to comfort victims of violent crime. I'd spoken at funerals and weddings, sometimes within the same weekend, because when you wear the badge long enough, you stop being just a cop. You become a witness to the full spectrum of human life. And through all of it, I'd learned that justice wasn't about the loudest voice or the biggest rule book. It was about empathy, about knowing when to speak and when to just listen. That's what made me good at my job. That's what made people trust me. But even with all that experience, all the nights I spent in danger, all the de-escalations and arrests, all the tactical training and mental conditioning, nothing ever tested me the way fatherhood did. Nothing prepared me for watching my daughter, born with a condition she never asked for, navigate a world that wasn't built for her. I spent my career protecting strangers, but I never imagined I'd need to protect my own child from a woman, with a clipboard and a smile. For years, I kept the 2 lives separate. The badge stayed in my drawer when I was off duty. I wanted Emma to grow up with a dad, not a sheriff. I didn't want her to associate protection with patrol cars and courtrooms. I wanted her to feel safe because I was there, not because I carried a title. But that day, as I watched Karen strip away my daughter's dignity in front of a crowd of her peers, something shifted. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about principle, about standing between the innocent and the cruel, about stepping in when no one else would. Karen had no idea who I was, and truthfully, that was her mistake. But more importantly, that was my choice. To stay quiet, to be the humble neighbor, to avoid invoking my authority just because I could. But there comes a point when silence enables harm, and that moment came when my daughter's eyes filled with tears on what should have been the happiest day of her year. I didn't step forward that day as the sheriff for the county. I stepped forward as the sheriff for her, for Emma. And when I showed Karen that badge, I didn't do it to threaten her. I did it to remind her, and everyone watching, that the law doesn't protect bullies. It protects little girls in wheelchairs with butterfly cakes and party hats. After Karen's public humiliation of my daughter, I didn't act right away. Not out of hesitation, but because I knew that in situations like this, timing was everything. Years of experience had taught me that the difference between justice and chaos often came down to how calmly you responded when the world was pushing you to explode. So I stood there for a moment, letting the dust settle, watching Emma wipe, her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to salvage what remained of her birthday. Parents stood awkwardly in clumps, unsure whether to leave or stay, and kids held half-eaten cupcakes like they weren't sure if the party was still happening. Karen, meanwhile, had retreated to the sidewalk, clutching her documents and muttering under her breath like she was the victim of a neighborhood uprising. I quietly asked two neighbors, Paul, who lived 2 doors down, and Andrea, who had filmed the entire incident on her phone, to stay nearby. "Can you just hang around for a few minutes?" I said calmly. "I might need you." Paul nodded without asking a single question, and Andrea slipped her phone back into her pocket with a tight smile. I looked down at Emma, who was trying her best to stay strong. "Daddy's just going to talk to someone," I told her, and her tiny hand reached out to hold mine for just a second before letting go. That was all I needed. I walked across the lawn slowly, deliberately, like I'd done 1,000 times before on calls. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't puff my chest. I approached Karen as if I were approaching a concerned citizen who had simply overstepped her bounds, which for the moment was giving her more dignity than she deserved. "Karen," I began, "I'd like to speak with you privately for a moment." She turned around, visibly rattled, her composure cracking under the weight of the crowd now watching her every move. "I don't have anything to say," she snapped. "I've made my report and I'll be forwarding it to the board. This entire event is a violation. Unregistered guests, noise complaints, ADA non-compliance, the works." I nodded. "I've reviewed the HOA bylaws, and I'd like to clarify something with you before you do anything further." I reached slowly into my back pocket, not with force or aggression, but with quiet purpose, and pulled out my badge. I flipped it open, holding it so only she could see. "My name is Sheriff David Harlow," I said. "County Sheriff. Elected. Official active duty, jurisdiction right here in this neighborhood." Karen's face went pale, her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She blinked twice, as if trying to convince herself that what she was seeing wasn't real. "This is a joke," she finally said, voice shaking. You can't use your position like this. You can't threaten me." I shook my head slowly. "I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you. What you did today may fall under civil harassment and possibly an ADA violation. You publicly berated a disabled child, attempted to enforce private rules over public decency, and disrupted a peaceful family event on private property. I'm sure you're aware that wheelchair access is federally protected. What you're not aware of, until now, is that this entire event is covered. My property overlaps with shared space, yes, but I filed for HOA compliance last week and received email confirmation of approval. And as far as your comments about damaging turf, I've got the entire thing recorded." Her jaw dropped open slightly. "You recorded me?" she asked. "I didn't need to," I replied calmly. "Andrea from across the street did, and so did the Ring camera from Paul's doorbell. You were filmed yelling at a minor, threatening to call enforcement for a birthday party, and directly ordering a disabled child to move because of grass." At this point, I noticed the shift. Karen looked around and saw the neighbors she once ruled with fear standing quietly behind me, watching, listening, no longer silent, no longer compliant. Her power didn't just evaporate, it turned against her. You people don't understand the pressure I'm under. This neighborhood needs order. There are rules. There have to be rules." Her voice cracked as she spoke, trembling between fury and fear. "And there must be consequences," I said, my tone as steady as ever. "But those consequences should apply to everyone, including you." At this point, I reached for my radio. I didn't want to call. Backup, I didn't need to, but I wanted it to be formal, documented, beyond debate. "This is Sheriff Harlow requesting a unit for a nonviolent community dispute. Possible civil harassment, potential ADA issue. No threats, no weapons, requesting presence to take statement." The response came back within seconds. "Unit en route, ETA 6 minutes. Karen's composure shattered. "You're calling in deputies? Are you serious? You're really going to do this to me? I was just trying to keep things civil." "Civil doesn't include making a child cry in front of her friends," I said. "You abused your position. You misused policy as a weapon. You turned a community into a courtroom and you appointed yourself judge and jury. But today, Karen, you're going to answer to someone else." When the deputy cruiser rolled up, sirens off but lights flashing, the crowd stepped back instinctively. The two young officers stepped out and approached us. I greeted them, provided my badge number, and briefed them on the incident in front of Karen and the neighbors. Then I asked Paul and Andrea to provide their statements, and they did so without hesitation. Andrea even airdropped the video to the officers on the spot. Karen tried one last act of desperation, sputtering nonsense about a sheriff abusing his position, but the evidence spoke louder than her tantrum. "Ma'am," one of the officers finally said, "we're going to need you to come with us to make a formal statement. You are not under arrest, but you are required to cooperate while we assess this situation." Karen stepped back as if someone had slapped her. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I am the HOA. I looked her in the eyes. No anger, just clarity. "No, Karen. You were the HOA, but today you reminded everyone why you shouldn't be." As she was escorted off the lawn, shoulders sagging, the community stood in quiet solidarity. And I turned, back toward Emma, who was now sitting upright, her party hat slightly crooked, a hopeful smile slowly creeping back onto her face. "Is it over?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, baby. It's over. She won't be bothering you anymore." The guests clapped, not loud, not celebratory, but in that quiet, relieved way that only comes when justice has finally been served without violence or chaos. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about drawing a line in the sand, about reminding a neighborhood that compassion isn't optional, that rules are not meant to be weapons, and that when good people stand up, even just one, it gives others the courage to do the same. That was the confrontation, not a battle of fists or legalese, but a moment where dignity met authority, and this time, dignity won. In the days following the incident, the neighborhood that once lived under the quiet shadow of Karen's authority began to awaken. What had once been whispered behind closed doors, the fear, the frustration, the exhaustion of living under constant HOA scrutiny, was now spoken aloud with newfound courage. Karen's removal from the HOA board happened within 48 hours. After the deputy filed an official incident report and video footage circulated among community members, the board had no choice but to act. A special emergency meeting was called, and though Karen tried to defend herself through a flurry of emails and passive-aggressive memos, the damage was done. Her reputation collapsed under the weight of her own words and actions, now documented in high definition and witnessed by half the neighborhood. The vote to remove her wasn't even close. Unanimous. She didn't just lose her position, she lost the very power she'd weaponized for years. And in that absence, something incredible began to bloom. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact at the mailbox now stopped to chat. People who had once nervously trimmed their hedges or hid holiday decorations started asking questions like, "What do you think we should do next?" For the first time, the community felt like a community, not a gated battleground. But the moment that truly hit home, that truly turned the tide from confrontation to healing, came just 3 days later. I was on the porch with Emma, still unsure if she fully processed everything that had happened, when a small parade of cars pulled up. One by one, neighbors stepped out, holding wrapped gifts, balloons, cupcakes, and cards. Paul and Andrea led the way, followed by parents, kids, and even the elderly couple from the corner house who hadn't attended a public gathering in years. They had planned a second birthday celebration, this time for her. No HOA interference. No clipboard, just love. We moved the tables back into the yard, and someone brought a Bluetooth speaker. This time the music was louder, brighter, free. Emma beamed from ear to ear, her chair surrounded by kids holding sidewalk chalk, not forms. And when she saw the new sign, hand-painted by the community, that read, Emma's Corner, mounted near the oak tree she loved to sit under, her voice caught in her throat. "Is this for me?" she asked. I crouched beside her and nodded. It always was, sweetheart. They just didn't know it yet. One of the HOA members, a younger woman named Jill who had never challenged Karen publicly, stepped forward with a microphone and cleared her throat. "On behalf of the HOA board," she began nervously, "I want to apologize to Emma, to Sheriff Harlow, and to every resident who felt unheard or mistreated under Karen's leadership. We failed you, and that changes today." There was a pause, then applause. The real kind, not the polite kind. Jill went on to announce a full review of the HOA's policies, especially those affecting accessibility, personal expression, and family gatherings. She promised transparency, open communication, and more importantly, humanity. That was the word that echoed in my head. Humanity. It had been missing here for a long time, buried beneath red tape and fear. But now it was back, alive, visible, in every smiling face that stayed long after the cake was gone. Over the following weeks, the changes continued. The board opened public input sessions, and I was asked to serve as an advisor on community safety and civil rights. I accepted, not for control, but for protection. For people like Emma. For families who needed someone to quietly ensure that what happened to us would never happen again. The ramp leading from the sidewalk to the lawn, the one Karen had once threatened us over, was rebuilt, reinforced, and made permanent with funding from the HOA. It now included a small wooden plaque that read, "Access is freedom. Freedom is for all." Neighbors began to talk about things they never had before. Real concerns, real fears, real dreams. We started planning community events together. The Halloween decorations that had once been considered visual clutter were now part of a neighborhood contest. A newsletter went out, not filled with warnings, but with birthday shout-outs, block party announcements, and Neighbor of the Month features. People laughed more. Doors stayed open longer. Kids played without being shushed. And through it all, Emma smiled. She started painting again. She stopped asking if she was allowed to be somewhere. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. And for me, well, I stopped looking at my badge as something I needed to hide. I wore it proudly when I was on duty, and even when I wasn't, I stood a little taller. Not because I had put someone in their place, but because I had helped everyone find their place, the place they belonged. The day after the second birthday party, I found a note tucked under my windshield. But this time it wasn't a complaint. It was a thank you. No name. Just a simple line written in neat cursive. We were all waiting for someone to stand up. Thank you for doing it first. I folded it, slipped it into my wallet, and carried it with me on every shift. Because sometimes authority isn't about power. It's about protection. And in that moment, in that neighborhood, I didn't just protect my daughter. I helped protect something deeper, the kind of community she could finally feel safe growing up in. That's a badge I'll never take off. In the weeks that followed, peace returned to Willow Creek Gardens. Not the fake kind masked by manicured lawns and silent neighbors, but the real kind born from truth, healing, and finally, understanding. The noise of conflict had faded, replaced by laughter echoing from porches, the rhythmic squeak of Emma's wheelchair rolling down freshly widened sidewalks, and the soft hum of community, genuine, inclusive, and unafraid. And as the neighborhood stitched itself back together, I found myself reflecting not as the sheriff, but as a father. The badge I carried all these years never felt heavier than it did the day I realized it might be the only thing standing between my daughter and the cruelty disguised as civility. I never wanted Emma to grow up in a world where someone like Karen could make her feel small, excluded, or unwelcome. I worked my whole life in law enforcement to keep people safe, but I hadn't expected that the fight for my child's dignity would happen not in the field, not in courtrooms or jails, but right in my own front yard. That's the strange thing about parenthood. It humbles you, resets your priorities. You can face down criminals, walk into dangerous situations without flinching, but watching your child's eyes fill with tears because of someone else's ignorance, that breaks you in ways bullets never could. And yet there was a lesson in all of this, that standing up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it paints a target on your back, is sometimes the most powerful example you can give your child. Emma smiles again now, wider than before. She doesn't ask for permission to play where she wants, or whether her chair is allowed somewhere. She paints with bold colors again. She waves at neighbors who now wave back with warmth instead of politeness. And every time I see her laugh beneath the tree we once called disputed lawn space, I feel something loosen in my chest. Not pride, exactly, but relief. We kept our ground. We didn't let her birthday be defined by cruelty. We reclaimed that space. And through that quiet act of resistance, we gave Emma something bigger than a party. We gave her belonging. I've come to understand that some badges stay tucked away, not because we're hiding, but because we believe in leading with humanity first. But sometimes, just sometimes, you have to pull it out, not to show force, but to remind people that justice isn't optional. That kindness has teeth when it needs to, that even the quietest father can roar when his child is under threat. So no, I didn't step forward that day as the sheriff. I stepped forward as a dad who simply had enough. And as I watch Emma grow into herself, strong, proud, unafraid, I know now that I would do it all again, every time. Because protecting her wasn't just my duty, it was my honor. If you've ever had to deal with an HOA that crossed the line, that used rules as weapons instead of guidance, then you're not alone. Maybe it wasn't as extreme as what happened to my daughter, or maybe it was even worse. Either way, your story deserves to be heard. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're a wake-up call. Like and share this video if you believe no child should ever be humiliated in the name of community standards, and no parent should have to choose between silence and justice. And don't forget to subscribe to the HOA Stories, where we expose the truth behind gated smiles and picket fences. Next week, I'll reveal how one HOA president funneled community fees into a secret personal project, and how one resident's curiosity uncovered the entire scheme. You won't want to miss it.